this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. And we want you to know, if you don't believe in a God, you're not alone. And if you do, don't be alone. Join us in our discussion today. Right here in East Tennessee, we have free-thinking atheists and agnostics who meet to discuss things and talk with people who are curious about so-called the supernatural and other alternative viewpoints. So join us. Today is December 18. It's a call-in show, and we invite you to talk with us. Call in.
This is, I'm sorry, the December 17th. I put it on the list.
You're right. Yeah, the time.
But we'll move. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often at a bar or restaurant. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. After the show for food, drinking, conversation. To find us, just look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
And the Rationalists of East Tennessee meet monthly, have activities on the first and third Sunday mornings with lectures and roundtable discussion. And the second Sunday is a book club and discussion. The fourth Sunday is reflection gathering, which is potluck afternoon, sometimes and often at members' homes.
Okay, we'll be talking about today dreams, visions, and reality. But first, we have a little news item we were going to talk about. Back in November, the Catholic Church decided to exorcise Satan from the state of Illinois. According to Bishop Thomas Paprocki, Satan and his minions were going to take over the capital and were positioning their followers to spread demon seed all over Illinois. If that sounds far-fetched, then consider that the Catholic Church, led by the sage Bishop Paprocki, held an exorcism there for the purpose of thwarting the Dark One's plans. What was his plans? Well, to get a bill signed into law that allowed for gay marriage. However, the law went into effect as submitted. It's still in power. Apparently, Satan is still living in Illinois, or not living, of course, at all. And the Catholic Church once again shows its lack of power over the supernatural, apparently because there's no such thing as the supernatural.
That's interesting. In the 21st century, talking this way about Satan then left Illinois and went over to Indiana for a while, do you think?
Well, it's much worse than just talking about it. Every year, there are people that are killed during exorcisms. Let me see.
Yeah, that's a sad thing. It does happen sometimes, not often, fortunately.
Yeah. Anyway, children, adults, one of the main methods for people use to exorcise demon is to wrap the victim in blankets and lay on them, which has caused, in many cases, suffocation. Now, the freedom to act under your religion does not include the freedom to murder.
Those are other people's freedoms are involved.
That's right. And of course, the legal authorities will jump down your throat if you end up hurting people using this practice.
And our point here is not if people want to practice exorcism, and what they call exorcism, that's their right, as long as they don't physically harm somebody. And if people want to believe that, that's their business. As long as you have freedom to say, well, that seems awfully strange in the 21st century for grown men to be talking about exorcising a demon from the state of Illinois. I mean, grown men you'd think would know better than that.
The Catholic Church is experiencing a resurgence in exorcism lately and has been recruiting more and more priests to perform this ancient rite. This is the typical church spiel. Evil beings, that is, invisible, undetectable, and unprovable beings, have taken up residence in something or someone, and God apparently doesn't want to stop them without coaxing from us. So the church invents a cure to sell to the public. They can persuade God to stop Satan. And this is as old as the first witch doctor wearing a frightful mask and dancing around a fire to remove an evil spirit. The mask now is a weird hat, and instead of dancing, they make a show of praying really hard. But it's the same old mumbo jumbo. It is hard to believe that this is still going on.
I think American Catholics on the whole, I don't think buy this. I think what's happening.
I'm not talking about American Catholics. I'm talking about priests and bishops and the church leaders.
They're probably suffering pressure from Brazil and other countries where they still have this kind of belief system, and wherever the Pentecostal churches are in those countries, they are rife with demonism.
But I think it would be wrong to just say it's just Pentecostalism, because you have this kind of thing going on in regular Protestant denominations as well as some Catholic.
Most Protestants don't go much for this kind of exorcism. I think they've outgrown most of them.
Well, there's video on the internet right now with Sarah Palin undergoing some type of exorcism and witnessing to the fact that witches need to be exorcised. Is she Pentecostal?
Well, it's pretty hard to put her in a category at all when it comes to religion. I think the best thing you could say is she is a weather vane. That's her religion, in my opinion. Whichever
way the wind's blowing.
Yeah, I don't pay much attention to her. She's not a religious leader. She's a politician.
Some people will argue that this law, just the law about homosexuality in Illinois, it's just men exercising their free will, and that praying for change will get God to sway people's minds on issues like this. But if God does that, doesn't free will go out the window? If God is interfering with their minds?
Well, the free will problem is a big problem for everybody, whatever their view is. And if you have total free will, you have a pretty random universe. For example, suppose you give me a good argument. I say I'm compelled to agree with it. Now, I don't believe something because I will it. I believe something because I'm compelled to believe. We even use an expression, I am forced to believe. Now, I think what we mean by free will is I want the right to listen to you and to listen to someone else, so that whatever compels me, at least I can have the options of seeing what's going to move me and drive me. I mean, this is deterministic language, you see. So, and all religions have this problem, and the secular view has the same problem. I just saw not long ago at the East Tennessee Rationalists talking about the mind-body problem somewhat, and one little phrase was in the film, and it was very interesting for him, panpsychism. Panpsychism was right in the middle of it, and this is a scientist talking. And what he was trying to deal with is that the brain gives information. Parts of the brain give information to the parts of the brain. The word information, see, is that an anthropomorphic view? Parts of the brain giving information to other parts and to the body. And he used panpsychism. It's almost indicating parts of the body are sensitive to other parts of the body. So,
well, if you take a split brain patient, you got their corpus molendus, or what is it, colossum molendum, and they literally have information in one part of the brain that the other part of the brain doesn't know about. And I've seen studies where they could ask a person like, write your answer down or press this button for yes or no, and they ask them a question, they get different answers on different hands, because different hands are controlled by the different parts of the brain, different sides of the brain.
In other cultures, that has been a reason for them to believe they were demon possessed.
Well, the thing about it is,
explain.
The thing about it is, how would you explain that in terms of soul? Does the soul get split when you get your brain
really good
split?
Point. For Aristotle, the word soul meant simply the whole body working. We talked about this like soul music. It doesn't mean there's some music out there. It's the whole orchestra composing together. And that's what Aristotle meant by soul. Others have meant a disembodied something. And your point is well taken. Once it's disembodied, then Can it be split?
Right. Well, the thing about it is there's never been any example of intelligence existing outside of some firmware or hardware that supports it, like the brain in our case, or the computer's hardware in the case of a computer. You can't just have free-floating intelligence, which is what many of the claims of the church revolves around. God, saints, demons, angels. Just, angels may have a body, but they certainly aren't using them when they come to earth that anybody has seen. Yeah. But anyway, getting back to exorcism, exorcism really isn't about men's actions or free will. It's about Satan's or demons possessing people and getting them to do weird things. But in that case, what chance do us poor humans have if we get infested? It's up to God to decide to remove them from us or not. So here we are, poor humans. We're getting infested by Satan, and if God doesn't,
here's the interesting thing
intervene,
about this.
We're screwed.
On Christian theology, I mean the traditional Christian theology. Now I want to say there are various Christians who differ on that, and I don't want to pigeonhole everybody. But traditional Christian theology is there is a Satan, and that eventually he will be bound, captured and bound forever. Now, it seems to me, and I as a kid wondered about this, if this is Satan's end and there's no redemption for Satan, why would you keep him alive in the first place to do all this mess? It seems to me very irresponsible.
Well, what chance do us poor humans have anyway if we got a supernatural entity out there that has the powers of a god that can change the earth and change all the evidence? For us to look at the evidence and say there's no God, or the earth is 4 billion years old. If we look at the world around us and accept the evidence, but some Satan has put it there, we're screwed again.
Well, the ancient Greeks had, before the Christians, and independently of the Jewish tradition, had many, many, many gods. And that's the way they explain goodness in the world and harm and destruction. And they believed these gods were constantly at war with each other, and so tornadoes could be explained by a god, the storm god.
Right, but that particular god, or the chief god, couldn't just wave his hand and get rid of all the other gods. Theoretically, Yahweh could do that. He's all powerful.
Well, that's what the Hebrew tradition tried to come up with, is a one God who had complete control. And they ran into problems with that, and they knew it. See, that's the genius of the Hebrew tradition, is the book of Job is written by a beautiful poet who's a dramatist. And he has this drama trying to say, why is it Job, this good man, suffering so much? And the Hebrews had this problem throughout their tradition, is if God is in control, why isn't he controlling it better for the good people?
Yeah. Well, he could be having some simple bet with Satan, and your life, it doesn't mean anything in terms of the bet.
And it's a big problem as to whether the writer of Job
didn't think
really believe that to be a real. I mean, it is so ridiculous that it makes you wonder if this was just his way of raising the question in the first place. And then you had the problem, if you have the demons, then who controls them? And if you have monotheism, and that's the point you're trying to bring up, if you have monotheism, God in control, doesn't seem to be. And then you pass the buck over to poor Adam and Eve. You say, well, if they hadn't sinned, wouldn't have all this problem.
Yeah, it comes back down to the riddle of Epicurus. If God is all-powerful and omnipresent and loves us, why is there evil in the world? Because, why would he allow Satan to live? Why would he allow bad things to happen to good people? Especially, why would he allow bad people to have power over good people or rape them or kill them. And Epicurus finally decided that you can have all three, that the God of the Old Testament was well, he didn't know the God of the Old Testament. But if you have a God who has those attributes, all-powerful, all-loving, and omniscient, then you can't have evil. But if evil exists, then you can't have that kind of God.
It can't be good. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see how people like ourselves are trying, you inherit viewpoints, and then you're trying to work through it to solve real empirical questions. Mm-hmm. And over in Mesopotamia or Persia, at that time, they had a view called Zoroastrianism. And that's a view that God has basically a dual personality. Mm. And some even interpret this to be two gods.
Schizophrenic.
Yeah, he's divided, and the God of goodness and the God of evil. And then their hope was, and their faith was, that the God of good would eventually triumph.
Well, if you think about even the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, God presents himself as a burning bush, tells Moses that he's got to go free his people, sends him on a mission. The next day, Moses wakes up in an inn, goes out on the road, and God's there and tries to kill him. That's pretty schizophrenic.
Well, and then the wife figures out that if you circumcise their son,
that's a strange way out of that particular pickle, isn't it?
Well, I think that was their way. See, what I'm suggesting is here you have people like you and me trying to say, where did circumcision come from in the first place? And they didn't know. Mm-hmm. So they came up with this story. Now, one conjecture for circumcision as to why it came about is maybe, it's interesting to me, it's mostly in hot countries it developed. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you were circumcised, the men didn't smell as bad. That's one theory.
Could be.
Another theory is that the gods are always wanting sacrifices, and so you give them a little foreskin, and that's making a better deal than giving them an arm. And another is simply it's a tribal mark.
Yeah. Let me take just a minute to remind the audience this is a call-in show. The number to call is at the bottom of the screen, and we have our phone lines now open, I believe. I saw the door open a second ago and didn't know if he had signaled us or not.
We want to talk about visions that people have had. It's part of our story here, and part of our theory here we're working on is that people have tried to explain things and deal with the reality as best they could with the equipment.
Well, sure.
And we have to remember the people in the Hebrew Bible, for example, and the ancient Greeks, they didn't know anything about Sir Isaac Newton. Mm-hmm. And Darwin or Einstein.
Right. And even Newton didn't know about Darwin, so he had no way of knowing where people came from, and had to attribute it to a divine power.
There was a Jew by the name of Philo, just about 32 years or so before the Christian era came in, and he was living in Alexandria, Egypt, in a non-Jewish, in the Hellenistic world. The Greek world, the Greeks had taken over, and you had to know Greek. Mm-hmm. And so he was writing in Greek, even though he's a Hebrew, and he was trying to explain his Hebrew tradition to the Greeks. But to do this, he had to make Moses into a philosopher, like the Greek philosophers. Mm-hmm. And so you can see he reworks his tradition, and he's worried about the fact that the Hebrew tradition had God more like a man, living up in space somewhere.
Yeah, the early books do treat him that way.
He didn't like the story of Elijah and Enoch going up, you see, because that sort of indicated, located God somewhere, in space and time. And that bothered him. And see, the early Greeks, and Plato in particular, they had subjected that kind of thing to a critical analysis. And so he tried to say, well, God is, I think what he was doing is saying God is really the principle of goodness, you see. Mm-hmm. And is a principle. And so he translated much of Hebrew monotheism into ethics. And he thought that would be more understandable to the Greek world.
When was this?
This is around, this is right about a half generation before presumably Jesus came.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Because I've read articles where they say that Christianity, or actually Judaism, wasn't that really concerned with morals. It was concerned with obedience to the Word of God.
Well, I think what you could say is Christianity...
Until Jesus, of course, came along.
Yeah.
That's what the point I was trying to make.
That, I think, is a great misunderstanding, because the early Hebrews were really worried. A lot of those dietary rules they had were partly to say some things you just can't eat. They had a lot of washing. They didn't know about germs.
But God should have known about the germs.
Well, that's the problem. You and I know that's just baloney.
Yeah.
But they had to deal with a problem in their world. And I mean, you believe in invisible things. That is, you can't see them with your eye, like germs.
Well, they're not invisible. They're just small.
Well, they're invisible to our eyes.
To our naked eye, yes.
But they had to deal with something they couldn't deal with very intelligently. And so they had gods and Satans and angels and all kinds of ways of trying to say, well, this is how disease...
Trying to make sense of the world.
Yeah. And you can...
And the best way to make sense of the world is to give it an intelligence or a purpose, an agency is what they call it.
That's a good way to put it. And Philo, that Jewish intellect, came up with the word logos, Logos, which means something like logic, reason, or word, communication. In fact, and he was trying to say, well, the universe is orderly, and so most of what he was trying to do is what they call God is really the works of nature. And he was trying to make it sensible to them. Yeah. And today and then the early Christians...
People still speak in those terms. I mean, Einstein still used the word God for nature.
Oh, yeah.
So it's still common.
Yeah, he got that from Spinoza, a Jew in the 17th century. But he says you can study God. That is nature.
Nature, right.
And
but it's very confusing. We already have a word for nature. Well, we really need to just use that word because we throw all this extra baggage into it.
Well, nowadays we can do that. But in the Hebrew tradition, there is no word in Hebrew of that time for nature that I know of. Now, the Greeks did. And the Greek word is physis, from which we get the word physics. But what happened after Philo is, and many generations later, is we developed then a lot of logos, like psychology, sociology, physiology, and this was saying, now we can study the things because all of them have order and structure to them.
Right.
And so, and we're still doing this, you see. As a humanist, what I'm trying to say is, I don't want to say that everybody who's a theist back then was just a lunatic. That's wrong. They were doing what we're doing. And when people look at us 200 years from now, they're going to laugh at some of our views. But I don't think we're lunatics. We're
not mine.
They were just struggling, trying to solve with the equipment we got.
What they have, yeah.
The Pharisees, who have a bad rap in the New Testament, were simply trying to work out these ethical rules and regulations and in their society so they could live together.
Right.
And the Sadducees were the ones who got a lot of political power because they were mostly controlled by, first the Greeks came in with Alexander the Great, and then the Roman Empire, and so the Sadducees and the high priest were trying to negotiate the politics and all of that.
Well, we've taken up about half the show and haven't even got to our subject yet. Visions. So let's take a break. We'll put up our information videos here in a second, and when we come back, we'll get into that. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions.
And we are here every Tuesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on community television, and you can stream online outside Knoxville. Just go to CTV Knox, KNOX.org, ctvknox.org.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets every Tuesday. We have evening meetups at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for fun, food, drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for camaraderie, community, and outreach to the atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded people in the East Tennessee area.
And so RET, the Rational of East Tennessee, has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of lively topics and timely and sometimes timeless issues. Once a month we have a book club discussion, but you don't have to have read the book. Somebody will have read it.
Of course, it would help if it did.
It would help, but you don't have to.
Right. Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you'll find that if you don't believe in God, you'll also find that you're not alone. This is a call-in show, and we're live today, December 17th, 2013, and viewers can call in at the number at the bottom of the screen. Sam, would you go ahead and put on the information videos, please?
Talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find...
Ask that question.
And welcome back to the show. In the program that we're doing, we're talking about visions, spirits, reality. Sometimes they overlap, and one of the reasons that they overlap is a condition called temporal lobe epilepsy. A possible link between epilepsy and greatness has fascinated biographers and physicians for centuries. Temporal lobe epilepsy has a side effect. Instead of just seizures, you oftentimes will have hallucinations and, visual and auditory hallucinations. In his treatise on epilepsy, a French 17th century physician, Jean Taxil, refers to Aristotle's famous epileptics. And this list includes Hercules, Ajax, Bellerophon, Socrates, Plato's, Empedocles, and Maracus of Syracuse, and the Sibyls. Taxil goes on to add his own names: Roman Emperor Caligula, Drusus, a tribune of the Roman people. Even Muhammad and Petrarch showed signs in the writings of having had temporal lobe epilepsy. There are several people that you would know, but not know that they had epilepsy. Ward Bond, the old wagon train, I think he was on, actor. He was rejected from World War II from the draft because of that. Bud Abbott and Costello, he had it and had it all his life and tried to hide it from by drinking. Margot Hemingway, film actress, had it from the age of 7, and they say that her death was attributed to suicide by an intentional overdose of phenobarbital, which is an anticonvulsant. She was trying to treat her own symptoms. Caligula and even Lenin had epilepsy, but they didn't particularly have the type that I'm talking about, temporal lobe epilepsy. More in line with the subject on the show are those who had that. It's a type of epilepsy that gives you visual and auditory hallucinations. They saw and heard things that weren't there. Also known as the sacred disease, many saints and other religious figures have been suspected of having had temporal lobe epilepsy. J.E. Bryan's 1953 book, Genius and the Epileptic, or Genius and Epilepsy, that's it, has a list of more than 20 people that combines the great and the mystical. And right at the top of the list is Joan of Arc. She experienced religious messages through voices and visions, which she said others could sometimes experience simultaneously. Some researchers consider the visions to be ecstatic epileptic auras, another term for vision, though more recent research may implicate idiopathic partial epilepsy with auditory features. Anyway, she heard voices. She acted on those voices, and she rose to greatness from doing that. But that doesn't happen all the time. If you act on voices, they could just as much get you in trouble. St. Catherine of Ricci had visual hallucinations, or maybe that's Ricci. Joseph Smith Jr. had epilepsy. He was rendered speechless, fell on his back, and had visions of darkness and light. St. Teresa of Lisieux, seized with strange and violent trembling. It was all over her body, had visual hallucinations and celestial visions. And Pio of Pietrelcina had visions at an early age about God, Jesus, and Virgin Mary. Now, of course, if he wasn't a Christian, those visions would have probably been of the holy images of the religion that he was currently involved in. Even Paul the Apostle could have been a victim.
Yeah, that's an old theory that he was epileptic.
His road to Damascus, life-changing event, could merely have been a strong temporal lobe seizure. In a Wikipedia article, The Conversions of Paul the Apostle said, could have been an event that took place, it did take place in the life of Paul the Apostle, which led him to cease persecuting early Christians and to become a follower of Jesus. And is nominally dated by researchers to AD 33 to 36. And all of the Pauline conversion, Damascene conversion, road to Damascus allude to this event. The Bible says that Paul's conversion experience was an encounter with a resurrected Jesus. I'll just say that he never actually met Jesus in the flesh.
Never met him in the flesh. And so I think where I differ so much with this is I think visions and hallucinations are much more widespread and are not explained very well by some abnormal physiological thing. I think most people have had all kinds of so-called hallucinations, but they got enough sense to deal with them. People have all kinds of. I have all kinds of wild dreams. The other day, I was early in the morning. I was dreaming, and I was singing. I mean, I was good. The only problem is I woke up.
No. Were you singing while you woke up?
I'm still loud.
Oh.
And I can hit high C, but nobody pays me to sing, unfortunately. It was all a dream, but it was as vivid as you.
Now imagine that
the real problem is not that people have these hallucinations and dreams. It's that people then start taking them. It's a matter of interpretation.
Yeah. Imagine if you were some prehistoric human who just had a vivid dream, as vivid as the one you were talking about his brother who died 3 days ago in some kind of ambush, and he saw his brother again after he died, and he had no other explanation than to think that he lived again. He's in another realm somewhere, and he's existing and talking to him, and he can still communicate him in certain instances.
Yeah, it's other people who correct our visions. I mean, kids will have an imaginary playmate. They go to school. What happens? Other kids say, "Well, I got one too," but and after a while, it fades away. Yeah. But it's very vivid to this child. Now, my point is, visions are good. A lot of scientists have envisioned possible solutions. They've also envisioned solutions that weren't very good.
Yeah, but a lot of times when they say, I envision this, they just mean that they imagine it, and they're letting their imagination, or actually controlling their imagination, to be able to visualize something where they can't see it on paper or in front of them. But we don't think of those as, quote, visions like you would in a religious sense.
Well, that's because it's interpreted differently. So people have all kinds of things in their dreams. My wife, daily, practically every morning she hallucinates music all over the ceiling. Now, she's got enough sense to know it's not really there, but she sees it, you see, in the sense that she sees it. I don't.
I think you're right about that. It's being more common.
It's a fertile mind. I wish I could see things like that.
Yeah. Think of the movie, The Beautiful Mind, and what he could envision and how he could make his visions actually work for him. But of course, it was involuntary. Most of it is. And there are people who have auditory hallucinations. And some people are inflicted with one that they hear a constant tone.
Oh, yeah.
Constantly their entire life. Yeah. The people in the room can't hear it. It's all internal. But if they didn't have the feedback from other people in the room, they might think it was actually a tone.
Yeah. You know? Oliver Sacks works on brain physiology. And I think he's just putting out a book on hallucinations, and I haven't read it yet. I just got a letter. My wife got a letter from him recently, but he's spent a good deal of his life studying our normal hallucinations.
Yeah. Then now we're in the era of induced hallucinations. You have so many psychotropic drugs out there that you can just take and off you go. But that doesn't mean that the visions that they see are connected in any way to reality.
In some cultures, they actually took things to do that, interpreted them to be religious experiences. So it's the interpretation.
Native Americans did that out in the West, taking peyote. But that doesn't mean they can interpret it as real if they want to. In other words, to gain insights into their normal lives, maybe. But they shouldn't take the further step to think that wolf man that they just met is an actual being, and other people might be able to interact with them.
Now, I think your point earlier is very useful. Is that people had these dreams, and many people interpret these dreams to be really visitations, especially if someone dear to you has died. They will come back.
And it wasn't just prehistoric people or historical. I mean, up until all the way through the religious empire, they had seers and dream interpreters. And I'd say until the middle of the 1800s, that were very common. And societies all over the world, that people would still be employed for that means. Maybe even in Africa and Congo now.
What's interesting about Freud, from his Jewish tradition, there are all kinds of dreams in the Hebrew Bible, and he said that he was a psychiatrist, and a medical doctor, and so he developed in the theory of psychiatry. He said dreams are a part of our way of dealing with our own problems. We dream up solutions or ways of trying to deal with it.
All right, let's see what our caller says about that. You're on the air. May we have a name or a nickname, please?
Hello, this is Faithful Forrest. I'm watching the show, and I'm responding to the question there about having visions. And you guys were talking about how people have experiences they think are real. And just recently, while telling people about family holiday traditions, I remember actually experiencing the smell. I had an olfactory vision of a favorite holiday food, which is custard. My father liked that, and my father was not a real baker, but he would bake custard around the holidays. And when I remembered that, I had an indistinguishable from reality, olfactory experience, right? I was smelling my father's custard.
Yeah,
that's not uncommon.
I remember I had one myself. It was an auditory hallucination. I was alone in the house, but I knew it was a hallucination because I was not totally alone. I had a dog with me, and a lot of these visual and auditory hallucinations will happen to you as you are dropping off on sleep. You are going through levels of subconsciousness and approaching dream sleep. And sometimes your mind would just play tricks on you. And what happened was I was going to sleep. I heard a huge bang in the house. It might as well just been a gun. Somebody took a gun and shot it off in the next room. Well, I jumped up and I looked around, and the dog was laying next to the bed, and the dog went. Like, what's going on?
What's your problem, huh?
But if it had been real, he would have been on his feet and yapping at the door. So I knew it wasn't real. But that's just the type of thing you can expect when you're dropping off to sleep. And if you're not careful, or if you live alone, you can think these things are real.
And I think most people in our audience know exactly what you're talking about. They've had I remember as a kid once just jumping because I was not asleep. I was just imagining playing football, and this ball was coming at me, and I jumped to and then I realized that this is all imagination.
And there's a condition called sleep paralysis, which a lot of people experience it. They can't move. They're in this semi-dream state, and they can't move. But even more so, some people get a sense of presence in the room, and that's terrifying. If you talk to people who have actually experienced this, they say they've never been more scared in their life. They were just petrified, and literally they couldn't move. But it was a sense of somebody else being in the room and them being helpless that set them so far. But yes, these things happen, but a lot of times, and especially in the past, in historical situations, they could have been passed off as real or believed.
You grew up in an environment where people, believed that there were demons. And it's easy to see, oh, hey, I just experienced one.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Now you've confirmed everyone else's bias.
Right. And not only that, but if you strongly believe in them, they could actually instigate it. They could actually feed into it and help cause it.
Well, yeah, it's easy to see where people imagine stuff that they already know about. You hear people talk sometimes about, remembering past lives, but you never hear anyone, explain something in an ancient foreign language that they never learned in their present life.
Right. Or give us information about that period that we didn't previously know and could then go verify.
Yeah. Well, hey, I hope you get some more calls. Maybe people have some other holiday visions like mine.
Sugar plum? Yeah.
That's right. Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
I think I mentioned this on the program once. My wife was a counselor, and she had a group of, she was counseling with people who heard voices. And she said to one of them, jump out the window. And the guy said, that's crazy. And she said, don't forget that. Just because you hear a voice, don't obey it.
Yeah,
and what she was saying, if you hear voices, okay. But you don't have to do what it says.
Right.
Whether it's in your head or outside, you have to think about it.
Right. Now, what gets me is that people hear a voice and they think it's God telling them to do something crazy. Now, my question would be, how did you know it was God? Epistemology. How did you come to the knowledge that it was God talking to you? I mean, there's somebody, I can't remember his name, who said that if God is, if something that is talking to you, telling you to do something that's immoral, it's not God. I mean, ipso facto, because God wouldn't tell you to do that. But
in the Hebrew Bible, they wrestled with this question. Presumably, Abraham heard God tell him to
kill his own son, and he jumped up and ran right out to do it. So
without telling his wife, and his wife would have said, "Go back to sleep." That's crazy.
So the phone lines are open now. We've got about 15 minutes left in the show. Happy to take your comments or questions.
Would you agree that it is good to have visions if you use them properly?
Well, I spent most of my adult life as a programmer, computer programmer, and I had to envision the answers or the procedures to be followed, because you can't just... It's not like building a house. You can't put two pieces of wood together and say, I'm going to make this into an angle that will support the wall. You have to build it all up here before you can implement it into the computer. And so that's one way of envisioning things and then making them work for you.
Yeah, most of us do this. We have to.
We have to.
And so it's good. Well, our parents have taught us this. If you're out there as a mother or a father, I bet you're telling your kid, envision what's going to happen if you do that. So in other words, envision the consequences, and then that'll feed back and say, well, I don't think I want to do that.
Yeah.
See, and that when they say think about it, they often mean, our parents were saying, think about the consequences. The consequences aren't here. Think, project into the future.
Right. I think about if you were a detective working on murders all your life. People would be constantly giving you information, and you would have to put it together in your brain all the time, in your mind, and weed out the lies and make things fit. It would be a real puzzle. And of course, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But at the same time, and this is something we're envisioning would help an awful lot. You would have to use it to reach an answer.
Well, just ignore that.
Yeah. So we were talking about Paul the Apostle was one of them.
Oh, yeah, Paul the Apostle is a good example of someone who was a Hebrew in a Gentile world. Now, here apparently he was from Tarsus, which is over there in Mesopotamia or Persia in that time, and Turkey. And then he comes to Israel, but he grew up in an environment that's not Jewish. And then he's got to somehow come to terms with these two environments. Then he's a missionary going out to Greece.
So you're talking after the conversion then?
Yeah, after his conversion. He's still got to work through that. So what I'm saying, see what you think, that Paul's visions are really his way of thinking, trying to put two and two together.
If in fact that he's using the visions himself, he's constructing and using them, it's a voluntary process. Yeah. But if it's in the case of it being epileptic, it wouldn't be voluntary.
I think it has nothing to do with epilepsy. I think that's been used too much. What it was is he's a Gentile, and he's with the Gentiles trying to convert them. And he's a Jew and they're asking.
Yeah, but he's trying to convert them after he had his epiphany.
Well, see, what I'm saying is epiphany has very little to do with what happened.
No, an epiphany can happen without epilepsy. I mean, he can just have an insight.
Well, my own view.
But anyway,
his thinking was going on, and that dream was just invented.
Oh, okay.
It's just the book of Acts is filled with all kinds of miracles. It's a novel. If you read Paul's epistles, what he's really working on is he's trying to deal with Gentiles, but he's a Jew, and he's got to deal with the question of circumcision. You see? And so he comes up with the notion is there is a Savior who does away with a lot of this sacrificial system. You see?
Well, in Judaism, they projected this Savior long ago. I mean, he was just saying, okay, there are people out there, the Christians that he was persecuting, saying that the Savior had come. So he apparently had some kind of insight that this could be the Savior, and that he was going to get behind it and help promulgate, expand it.
And he put that notion with the Logos of Philo. And other Jews were working on the Sophia, which is just a Greek word for wisdom. And so he turned Jesus into Logos and Sophia. And then time to get to the Epistle of the Hebrews, he makes Jesus, that author, we don't know who it is, makes Jesus a priest, makes him the sacrifice, makes him the Logos, makes him everything.
But you don't think
they're trying to solve these problems.
An actual vision. You think he purposely envisioned it that way?
I think that was simply the way they thought in that culture. They had to communicate. They had to, in other words, they would dream up stuff. You and I do this all. We dream up stuff. But what they did to communicate it, they made it more visual. We dream up things. Well, you dream up solutions. They did. See, what I'm arguing, they did the same thing. Only they dramatized it.
Well, if that's the case, he certainly did, because his epistles had him glowing, being a floating vision.
Well, one of his epistles, he says he went up into the third heaven. Okay, when you're dreaming and envisioning, you can go wherever you want.
So you think that really he was putting down his dreams?
He's putting down his dreams. He's putting down his thinking, his visions. And he did it in the way that he did it in that day. They dramatized it.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left in the show. Our co-host today is Dr. Joe Barnhart. He's a retired philosophy and religion professor. If you'd like to ask him any particular questions about Paul and whether or not he actually met Jesus or not, I know that's a sore point for a lot of people. The phone lines are open. The number's at the bottom of the screen, and we've got about 9 minutes left in the show.
Yeah, the famous missionary, Albert Schweitzer, wrote a book called The Quest for the Historical Jesus, and he raises the question in several of his writings. He wrote one on the Apostle Paul, too. He said, why is it that Paul in his writings never quotes the parables of Jesus? Where are the teachings of Jesus? I mean, it's as if he has never met a historical Jesus.
Albert Schweitzer, toward the end of his life, became a real doubter, didn't he?
Well, put it this way. He had a lot of... See, everybody's a doubter. The question about what? And he had a lot of... His view was, in one of his books, is he really thought, by interpreting the New Testament, that Jesus expected the end of the world in his time. That is in other words, a whole supernatural inbreak.
Do, even now. And
then Schweitzer came to the conclusion, it's kind of obvious he missed it. He was a mistaken prophet. Now, what Schweitzer did is say, okay, he was mistaken in that, but there are other things about Jesus that are better, and we can learn from that. In other words, just because a guy is not 100% accurate in everything doesn't mean he doesn't have a lot of insight and a lot of goodness. And of course, we hope that's true of us.
Well, most people do have human empathy and compassion. Some people embody that in their works and their speeches, and I think if Jesus did really exist, then he was a very empathetic and compassionate person. Some of the things that he said, like divest yourself of all of your possessions, and that's not really good advice. But trying to do your best toward your neighbor is good advice.
Yeah.
So
that particular piece of advice in the story goes this way. A rich young ruler comes to him and said, "What must I do to inherit the kingdom?" And you can interpret this as a joke. He said, "Sell all your goods," and he knows the guy's not. So get over that hump and let's get down to business, because selling your goods is not going to help a lot of people.
Yeah. And he also he asked another person, or answered another person that question, said, obey the commandments. I mean, or was it the same person? But he wasn't talking about the 10 Commandments. He was talking about the 614 Jewish commandments, wasn't he?
Well, the problem is it's hard to nail down what the historical Jesus was, right? There's a Muslim who's written a book called Zealot. And he claims that Jesus was a first century zealot. And that was, he was a member of a small group of Jews who wanted to violently overthrow the Roman government.
Or at least the government in that area, not the empire.
And now, he makes this sound more like one of the Muslims in Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, rather than... but there's enough in the Bible, you could get that. But there are other passages in the Bible that go completely against that. Now, whether you could straighten all those passages out, it's highly unlikely, in my opinion, to get one totally coherent picture. I don't see it. People have tried it. I mean, there's the old cottage industry.
Well, not only that, but when you're looking at the Bible, you're not looking at all of the books that were written from that time.
That's a good point.
You've got all these Gnostic Gospels. You've got the books that were left out of the Bible.
The Gospel of Thomas, which is mostly just teachings. You don't have a lot of miracles.
Isn't there a book of Mary and a book of Judas that were left out?
You got Judas, sure,
So you're not seeing the whole picture, even if you're just following the Bible.
So no, there was a culling out of a lot of this stuff.
Not only was it the Bible put together by committee, much later it was interpreted by committee.
Interpreted, exactly.
So you've got a lot of mistakes, or possible mistakes,
you're
creeping in there.
The point's well taken. Is you have people making a judgment as to what should be regarded as Scripture and what not.
Right, and what God really meant in this book, he doesn't mean anything in this book. Throw that one out.
And you have revisions going on. In fact, you have the Hebrews who mostly now are speaking Greek. wanted to have a Greek translation. But the problem was, and it's called the Septuagint, but the translation into Greek imported a lot of Greek ideology into their translation, so they had to have another translation. Now, what I'm suggesting is that interpretations are what religions do. It's what scientists do. You constantly have to reinterpret in light of other experiences. And that's what these ancients were doing, and that's what Christians and atheists and Jews and others are doing today.
Interpret and ignore. Like nowadays, we ignore all the passages that said that slavery is okay. What's funny is that we got over that problem. That we ignore the parts about slavery, but we still hang on to the ones about homosexuality.
And about women,
picking and choosing, and women.
I mean, there's one. I think Church of Christ still. Now, I could be wrong, but just a few years ago, if you were Church of Christ, you couldn't get up on the platform and speak. I mean, and some of the churches, I know in some of the Baptist churches, now this has changed a lot, but if a woman was to speak to the congregation at all, she had to be she couldn't be up
on the ground, on the floor.
Yeah, and of course Baptist churches differ on that now. But that's been, in other words, what I'm saying is that cultures come in contact with other cultures, and they have to revise in order to live with each other. And religions are basically cultures trying to come in. The Hebrews came into contact with the Greeks, and they came into contact with the Romans, and later on others, and so they've constantly, and Christians have had to do the same thing. All Hindus do the same.
Sure. But it's supposedly the Bible is the complete and total Word of God, and he hasn't changed his mind about anything. But you wouldn't find any modern day Christian that would actually try to stone his wife to death if she wasn't a virgin on their wedding day, or their unruly children, or any of that. We're getting down to about 3 minutes left in the show.
I want to recommend a good book.
Okay.
The New Testament Environment, and it shows.
Can you hold it up?
Yeah.
The New Testament Environment?
It's a very good book. It talks about, for example, the Hebrew background of the Essenes out there in the desert, the Pharisees, the Sadducees.
So it gives you a pretty good picture of the environment.
The diversity.
That all this happened in.
Incredible
and the different
diversity.
pressures that they were living under.
And they had to fight wars and try to live with each other.
Now, maybe you can help me with this. I have heard that Yahweh or Jehovah was, back when the Jews had many gods, before they weeded out. That Jehovah was one of them, but he was the war god.
Well, there's a passage saying he's a god of war.
The god of war.
But Yahweh, nobody knows for sure what that means. It may be built on the word, something like being. I am that I am. But you had Baal, Samuel is built on like El is a god in that desert area. And so you got people's names, Samuel, Daniel, Ruel, and on and on.
But I just think it's funny that if God was, back in the old days, was the war god or the god of war, but now he is morphed to today, he's considered the god of love. I thought that's just kind of funny that it would change that way over time.
What happens is all cultures, we talked about this earlier, all cultures have love for insiders and hostility toward outsiders. Both. Our culture
at least distrust.
And so you can have a lot of love in the Bible, mostly for insiders, and then hostility toward outsiders.
Well, it's getting down to the end of the show. Time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. We're bringing you 3 years of free thought and going strong.
So please give us some feedback, if you would. Let me give you the phone number, 865-272-9060. Or email us, freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. You can see the show every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and ctvknox.org.
Right. And we'd like to thank Sam, Jonas, and Forrest for technical support and the staff of CTV Knox. Remember, examine your beliefs. If there's